Welcome to the Purpose Focused Advisor, a podcast for financial planners, advisors, and RIAs looking to get the most out of yourself and your business. Join Rob Brown as he walks you through a journey that will allow you to take action in your business and your life so you can be the best that you can possibly be. Now here's your host, Rob.
Welcome. Time once again for the Purpose-Focused Advisor. Rob Brown here. Glad to be with you and excited to have Paul McManus with us today. We're going to talk about a lot of things about helping advisors stand out in the marketplace because we both think that's so important through the work that we do with advisors. But we're also going to spend some time talking about authoring books, which is something that I think is really important for the right advisor. So Paul is the author of the Short Book Formula, whose goal is to help advisors stand out in the marketplace. And he's also the host of the $1 Million Producer Show. So Paul, welcome to the podcast.
Hey Rob, it's good to see you. I know we just had you were on my podcast I think a week or so back, and it was a great conversation. So I've been looking forward to this conversation with you today.
Yeah. That's one of the great things about doing podcasts is when you meet a great guest who has a podcast. It's always fun to flip it around and do it again, and it's a good way to meet each other's audiences, which is a great marketing technique too.
100%.
Well, Paul,
I just to add to that briefly. I mean, it's interesting. This most recent presidential election. Not to be political about it or anything, but I think some people are referring to it as the podcast election, meaning that podcasting and guest podcasting have, I think, really broken through and have become the media. I mean, more so than the traditional legacy media or corporate media. So it's interesting to see how this is now super mainstream.
Yeah. No, I'm with you there, and I think what I learned from that is that audiences enjoy authentic conversations. And when you and I are sitting here talking about whatever we're going to end up talking about today, you're getting it from our hearts because we both want to serve this audience. We know there are financial planners and financial advisors out there who are listening because they are looking for ways to stand out in the marketplace. I keep going back to that. I love that. I can see the title for this episode taking shape. But Paul, let's kind of go back in history a little bit. Kind of talk about how you got to the point of being someone who is a coach and a mentor to financial advisors through your podcast, through your book, and the other work that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll go back. So I think my backstory starts in 2016, and at the time, my very first financial advisor client found me. His name was Shane Walls. And at the time, he was already a successful producer. He was a financial advisor, mostly doing life insurance and premium finance and things of that nature. He was already successful. He was doing a couple $100,000 a year of production. And when he came to me, he wanted to grow. He wanted to scale his practice. And so the long story short is that over the course of a couple of years, I helped him go from that to around $2.5 million of commission in about a 2-year time frame. And you can imagine he was very excited. I was very excited because I got to see this amazing transformation and be part of it. And his producer group, his life insurance carriers, they all reached out to him and asked, what's going on here? You've been with us a long time. You've been steady, but suddenly you've just 10x'd everything that you've done. And so he was gracious enough to point the finger in my direction. And since then, I've just been working more or less exclusively with financial advisors to help them grow their practices. And I specialize in what I would describe as authority-based marketing systems. And there's different things that we can talk about there, but the main one that today I help advisors with, which is I think is just a key piece of authority marketing, is how to write and publish a book.
Okay, awesome. And so I think it's important to point out that what we're talking about today is germane to advisors of all types. So you mentioned more of an insurance-based advisor was that first initial success story that you shared, but I know that you work with advisors who are fiduciary financial planners
Yep.
who are growing AUM businesses too. So I point that
Yeah.
out because
Sure.
sometimes you hear about a specific way of business, or an
Yep.
advisor hears and they go, oh, well, he can't know what I'm talking about in my business.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah, just jump in there. So thank you for pointing it out. And since then, I've worked with, I would say, around 500, I just say financial advisors. It incorporates a couple different people. Today, I'd say my typical client is a successful wealth manager, probably does 100 million or more of AUM. And so it's more that holistic financial advisor that, really values the advice that they give, and they, the services and products they do, tends to be primarily AUM, but they also do other types of stuff, but it really is much more that holistic financial advisor or wealth manager.
right. So, and which is the same as my audience knows.
Yeah.
Our target audience for who we serve is very similar. We just do it in different ways, which is a great reason to also do the podcast, because it's a great way to share ideas. But I want to get on my soapbox here for a minute. So
Yeah.
when I talk to advisors, one of my greatest pet peeves is when they say, I don't have authority, or I am not unique, that this is just a business where we all have access to the same, products and services and platforms and software. So what do you mean I have authority? What do you mean I am unique? How does that, how I can't go out into the world and do that. And I don't think that's true. And I bet you don't think that's true either.
Yeah, no, there's something called imposter syndrome, which is an interesting phenomenon, because even though the people that I think we both serve are successful financial advisors, and and oftentimes they have a nice healthy ego, but sometimes when you say, hey, be an authority in your field, a thought leader, or things of that nature, it's like, hey, wait a minute, just what you said. I would just, in that case, I would substitute the word authority for influence. Another word I would use is expertise. And so I think the very same people, if you ask them and you look at what they do have, is they likely have years of experience. They likely serve hundreds of families, and they have the expertise to do that. And they also have the influence. Maybe it's more in a one-to-one way, where they're able to lead and influence their clients to make decisions that are good for them, right? And so they have that expertise and influence. I think when we talk about authority, it's more about being intentional about doing that on a bigger scale, in the minds of a broader audience. And so we take that natural ability we have in a one-to-one setting, and we purposefully design it so that we can create that same effect in the marketplace at large, and create what I would describe as more authoritative positioning. I mean, in a perfect world, ideally, when people inside that marketplace or industry talk about something in the perfect world, they'd be like, oh, you need to go talk to Rob about that. He's the authority or the expert when it comes to X, Y, and Z. Or you have to go talk to Paul about this. He's the authority or expert. So it's just a very intentional way to stand out in a way where people get away from talking about products and pricing and services, because a lot of those things, let's face it, are commoditized, right? And so the real value we bring is what we bring to the table ourselves, the client experience, the relationships. But in order to more seamlessly stand out and attract the right people to you, that's where the idea of authority marketing can be very helpful.
Right. And I guess maybe a little bit of a different twist that I would take on that is that authority, if it's exercised properly, is helpful, even if you're just building a small practice and you just want to slowly add the right type of client to your business to work with. It's not just about, I want to create this huge brand so that I can build a team of, 10 advisors and
Yeah.
50 support. That authority can be used in smaller practices and in bigger ones. But the other thing that you said, and I'm so happy about this because you used my word of the year. I didn't set out for this to be my word of the year at the beginning of the year, but it has turned into it as the year has gone along. And it's the idea of being intentional. I think so often when I talk with advisors about a number of things that they might like to do in their business, the reason that they don't have success with it is they haven't taken the time to be intentional. There I go, screw my favorite word up. Intentional about creating systems for doing what they're setting out to do. They say, I want to grow a bigger team.
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, what are the steps, intentional steps are you going to take to do that? I want to add more clients. What are the steps you're going to do this? I want to write a book. You've got to be intentional. I think intentionality and purpose is just so important. I'm sure you see that in your work.
I do, yeah, and a book is a good determiner, right? Because a book doesn't happen overnight per se. We have a process that it happens a lot quicker than most people might imagine, but it's something that you have to be intentional about, right? I mean, first, why are you going to write this book? There has to be some destination you want to get to. You have to go through the process, and then once you have a book, there's a whole other intentionality when it comes to how do you plan on marketing this, integrating with your business, and having it create the ROI that you're looking for. Getting back to something that you said earlier, yeah, it should be, authority marketing isn't about just having a big practice or doing anything like that. It's really about standing out and really being able to attract the right fit clients to you. And whether whatever your desire is, if you want to have a smaller boutique practice, the best position to be in is when you have more demand for your services than you have supply, because then what happens? Well, you get to be very picky about the people that you bring on. You get to likely raise your fees, and you get to just really enjoy the clients that you work with that much more. And the funny thing happens then is that as you're doing that, naturally the people that you enjoy most, they're going to start referring their friends to you, and friends are often birds of a feather flock together. And so whether your goal is to have set number of active clients that you work with, or your goal is to scale your practice, or anything in between, it's just one of the best, most effective ways to enjoyably hit your goals of growth or scale or what have you. I mean, I pinch myself now because I have a remote business, meaning that I don't have an office. I work out of a home office, and I work with financial advisors all over the country. And they hear me speak on a podcast like this, or maybe I go to an event, and then they read my book perhaps, and they show up in my Zoom room, and this is my first time to talk to them, but they've already know enough about me and what I do, and I just attract the nicest people, and we just have the greatest conversations. And the whole impact of authority marketing, it's not about ego. It's not about saying, hey, I'm great, people know my name. It's really fundamentally what it does is that it helps you to accelerate the speed of trust, right? So I believe that one of our biggest constraints in this business is that if all things being equal, if the products are the same and the advice is similar, and people have choice, what's the biggest constraint to bringing on the right fit clients? Well, we have to establish trust. I mean, we all want to get to the place of trusted advisor, where our client implicitly takes our suggestions, recommendations, follows our lead, and we want that, and they want that, because they want to be able to rely on us for that advice, and they don't want to feel that we have mixed motives, or that we're trying to sell a product or anything like that. And so if the constraint is the trust barrier, and authority marketing and maybe authorship specifically helps to accelerate the speed of trust, it's like I want to be doing that and doing that all day long, because it just leads to all these great outcomes.
Right. And so I love so much about what you said, because you really broke that process down a great deal. And the other thing that it reminded me of is it also lets you share your voice, the real you, when you're doing good authority marketing, whether it's a book or anything else that helps you do that. It is exposing your voice and your way of approaching things, which is something that is unique.
Yep.
No two advisors do things exactly the same way. And when you take the way that an advisor uniquely does things, uniquely tells his or her story, and then
Yep.
that interface with all of the people that they serve, that just creates, an infinite amount of
Yep.
uniqueness that can't be repeated. That you need to be intentional about sharing, whether it's in we call it a signature solution. It's one of the things we do in my practice and with my clients is we help them create a pathway that shows how the advisor or the advisory team helps their clients get from point A, where they are when they first begin working together, to point B, where that client would ultimately like to be. And we don't want them to just pull out the 6 steps from the Financial Planning Association website, as proper as those steps might be,
Sure.
because that's not their authority. That's not their
Yep.
story. That's not their uniqueness. Their uniqueness is that thing that makes it makes you really want to say, I really want to work with that person, because
Yeah.
we connect.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that ultimately it's uniqueness. I think that's the word, is that we can have similar ideas, and there can be different people that can help implement those ideas. But people, at the end of the day, they want to do business with people that they know, like, and trust. I mean, that's like a given, that all the technology change and AI and everything else. I mean, fundamentally, people want to do business with people that they know, like, and trust. And what I love about what I'll loosely describe as authority-based marketing systems, whether it's a book or a podcast, is that these are ways for people to get to know you in advance of ever meeting you, right? And so someone watching this podcast, they have a chance to hear not just ideas and expertise, but they also get a chance to, see someone's personality and say, okay, do I resonate with this person or not? And here's the thing, is that both answers are good, right? So we want to attract the people that are a good fit, because then it's a win for both parties. And for the person that watches this and says, I don't like this guy, he doesn't, for whatever reason, it's like, that's good too, because that, there's someone else that can serve that person. And it just, I mean, in my mind, it saves everybody a lot of time, and it helps people get to a good decision that they feel good about much more quickly than they would otherwise.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's absolutely right. So I want to talk about the short book formula in just a minute, but
Yeah.
before we get there, share, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 like concrete examples of authority marketing besides a book and a podcast, since you've already referenced those. So when you're helping someone develop authority, and you're saying, okay, what are the tools that I can help them create to show that authority? What are some other things that you might do?
Yeah, I mean, I think those really are the 2 main ones. Just trying to brainstorm for a second. I mean, there's other things that people can do. Oftentimes, it's what is it? It's oftentimes name recognition, right? And and traditionally, how did people create name recognition? Well, oftentimes they were maybe on media. And before podcasts and those things, I mean, it was getting on the local TV station, or if you're really big and influential, you might get on a national TV station. So imagine you're able to show up on whether it's Fox Business or something of that nature, and suddenly people see you and they're like, oh, and they know your name, and you become a household name, right? So just it's kind of like that. You're assumed to be there because of your expertise, but just kind of the name recognition and the authority that we ascribe to someone who is on a big platform or channel,
Right.
just happens naturally. I think in today's world, you don't need, I mean, that's great. I mean, if you have a chance to go on Fox Business or any other similar thing, that's fantastic. I'm not against it. I just don't think that it's necessary. I think that we live in an age where the tools to become an authority are much more democratized, meaning that, we can publish a book without having to get permission from some major publishing house. You're worthy of publishing a book. I can tell you what we look for in terms of it, but it's fairly broad in terms of who we think is a good fit. To have a podcast, I mean, when you started your podcast, did you have to go check with someone and say, am I worthy of publishing a podcast, or did you just go out and decide to do it one day, right? And so, and then I think it's the synergy from it, right? So you can write a book without permission, you can start a podcast without permission, but then how do you further build that authority? And I think you then leverage it into more opportunities. So in my case, I leverage the fact that I have a book and a podcast into opportunities like this, where I'm speaking on other people's podcasts, as a guest who serve the same audience, financial advisors. And so now I'm creating synergies where I'm able to, if I just come and didn't have a book and didn't have a podcast, but I just, emailed you and said, hey, I help, advisors write and publish books. I'd like to be in your podcast to sell my product and promote myself. You'd probably be like, I don't want to do that.
Right.
And so these are just tools of the trade. But it just creates synergy, and you do more and more of this. And then now suddenly someone hears you not just on one podcast, but suddenly you're on this other podcast, and then maybe another podcast. And suddenly you go from this complete unknown stranger to suddenly being a familiarity, and maybe someone listens to your ideas, maybe they buy your book or maybe they don't, but it just creates that top of mind awareness for someone. And of course, the more narrowly construed or defined your niche is, the more likely you are able to stand out as a bigger fish in a smaller pond, as the proverbial saying goes.
Yeah, that's great. And I was thinking about that, a question that I asked you. Maybe I didn't frame it exactly right, but some of the things that I think about when I think about with my clients, helping them, maybe it's taking some authority baby steps because they're not ready to do their own podcast, not ready to do the book. It can be podcast guesting. I have several clients right now who are actively looking or have somebody actively looking on their behalf for podcasts that serve their niche, that they can guest on. And that audience can get to know them. And there's obviously some strategies involved in that. I also have clients who are an expert in maybe the benefits package of a big company, and they might create some short videos that explain that expertise for the employees of those big companies, that they can then share with their clients, who can share it with their colleagues. And so their create is kind of like I said, kind of a baby step, but an important one, because it generates introductions to people that are like the people that these advisors want to serve. So I just wanted to throw those out there as a couple of things that I have worked with advisors on recently. But as I said, I want to talk about. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say that I'm a big fan of guest podcasting. People oftentimes ask me, like, what I'd recommend in terms of, everything can be of value, but oftentimes it comes down to sequence. And the three big ones in terms of establishing and building authority for me are primarily writing a book, then guesting on podcasts, and then having your own podcast. And I recommend them in those order. Writing a book, somewhat counterintuitively, when you talk about it, doesn't have to be this year-long sabbatical that you take and you go out and you rent a cabin in the woods and start smoking cigars for a year. Instead, we have a process to help people do it in as little as 6 weeks. And once you have that foundational piece in place, it becomes that much easier to become a guest on podcast. Because as a host, what do you look for? You look for someone that has knowledge, education, that can serve your audience in a way that's educational and not, salesy, so, quote unquote. the next step in my mind is, okay, well then if you like being on a podcast and that kind of media, then having your own podcast makes a lot of sense. And I would just say, and I'd love to get your take on this, is that having your own podcast can be a lot of work, right? So you have to genuinely enjoy doing it, because
Yes.
however often you publish, whether it's once a week or twice a month, whatever it is. I mean, it's an ongoing activity that you do over and over and over again, and so much of it is not about you per se; it's about you being a good host and asking good questions to people. And so you really have to have a desire and and a plan behind doing that. So that's why I typically recommend that as third on the list of things to do.
Yeah, and I would agree wholeheartedly with that sequence, that order. Obviously, you can do it any way you want to, but if you were just being intentional about setting out to go through a process like that, those would be the steps I would take. And with the podcast, doing your own podcast, again, it goes back to intentionality. You've got to understand what's involved, because it isn't as easy as hopping on Zoom and having a conversation. There's some work that goes on ahead of time, behind the scenes, and whatnot. So, Paul, I want you to ask me a question, and I'm going to give you the question to ask me.
Okay.
Here's the question I want you to ask me. I want you to say, Rob, I've thought about writing a book. Should I?
Rob, I've thought about writing a book. Should I?
Yes. I wanted to have a little fun with that for a second, because that is my answer. Whenever I have somebody come to me because they know that I've written 3 books, they say, well, I'm thinking about being an author. Should I write a book? My answer is yes. If you thought about it, you should do it. And it doesn't have to be for the authority reasons that we're talking about today. It could be just because you want to write something that shares your story that you want to leave with your family. But specifically, let's talk about why you created the short book formula as a way to help advisors stand out in the marketplace and respond to somebody like me who says, yes, you should write a book, and help them get it done. I think you said in as little as 6 weeks. That's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think one of the barriers to people, I think for a lot of professionals, successful professionals, it's something that maybe they've thought about, or maybe it's on their bucket list, but oftentimes the constraint or the challenge is either, I don't have enough time, I'm busy, I'm not a major in English literature, not a writer, and those are very natural things to think about and concerns. But fundamentally, what the short book formula, the book that I wrote, does is it reimagines the book, that it doesn't have to be this war and peace novel that's 300 pages long and does require that year-long sabbatical and the cabin in the woods and all those things, but instead it's something that in I tell people that they should think about writing a book that's between 12,000 words to 25,000 words. And I know for a listener that doesn't necessarily mean anything, but what I translate that to is that it's a book that can be read by your ideal reader in the course of 1 hour to 2 hours time. And so to me, where the magic is, it's not just saying, hey, I'm a author and my book is on your bookshelf and one day you'll read it. It's this is fundamentally, to create that authority and to use it as a tool to grow your practice. You actually want to have a book that's highly readable, that has a specific audience in mind, but most importantly, gets read or listened to, right? So I'm a big believer in audiobooks as well. And so once you create that framework and that constraint and say, okay, so, the upper constraint is 25,000 words, well, that now becomes a lot more manageable than the 50 to 100,000 word book that, would be a monster to accomplish. The second part of that is, okay, well, I'm not a writer, I don't have good grammar, whatever it is. And so our process is designed to essentially help people talk out the content of the book. So the people that we work with, financial advisors, they're successful. They, have at least a few years of experience, if not decades of experience, and everything in between. So they know what they're doing. They have the knowledge base. Oftentimes they have a CFP or different things. And what they're really good at is, leading and influencing, I'd say, an individual client. So they can take complex concepts and they can make them more relatable and concrete. They can use analogies and examples and stories. And that's really what a good book is, right? It's taking all those things that they do day in, day out, and capturing them in such a way that it becomes, I use this phrase, it becomes your salesperson in print. It becomes the best version of yourself, whether you're presenting or talking to people, the stories that you use. But now you have this tool that you can put out into the marketplace, and it's doing a lot of the heavy lifting for you. And so again, our process, the reason it's 6 weeks is that it's simply based on the idea that a client for us works with a book coach once a week and meets with them for an hour over 6 weeks. So that's where the 6 weeks comes from. We do give homework, and so there's maybe an hour or two of preparation before the calls. So the calls are very purposeful and intentional, and it yields a lot of results. But at the end of the day, part of our process is that we use advanced tools today, which is just meeting on Zoom or using tools like we use one called Otter.ai, which is an AI tool, but essentially just translates in real time the conversation word for word. And so we're able to collect these rich conversations and go deep and wide and in a very structured way. And then in our case, we have a professional writer on the team that collects all this, turns it at first into a first draft, and then the client and the book coach review that together, fine tune it and really make sure that the book represents their voice, their ideas, etc. Because at the end of the day, I'd say there's a lot of reputation risk. So for all the benefits of a book, there's also reputation risk, meaning that if it's not done well, you're going to get something. And I think a lot of people get stuck. It's like, I'm not sure if I want to publish this. And so what you really want is a book that you're super proud of, that you're excited to get out in the world, and that can really represent the best version of you and your ideas and the stories that you tell. And that's what we help people do.
Right. And what you just said in describing that process and what the outcome is a summary in a way of what we talked about having an intentional process, telling your own story, something that you can be proud of that represents you the best way that you possibly can, so that you show up as an authority in a very genuine way. And I love that you have that process. I've not written any of my books that way, but I know how well that can work. And so I appreciate that. So let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Paul, I've thought about writing a book because I want to improve my marketing. Should I do it?
Yeah. Most likely, yes.
Oh,
most likely, yes.
You hedged. I said yes all straight up. I was giving you the opportunity to.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's always the random. Probably not, but in most cases, yes.
Yeah.
And I would add to that is that, and here's something that's counterintuitive, probably for a lot of people, but the reason to write a book is not for book sales. And what I really mean by that is that it's not to generate royalties and create this passive income and then do those things. I mean, if you make a couple $100, couple $1,000, whatever, that's great, but that's besides the point. A book done well is something that becomes integral to, I think, your personal identity, your personal brand. I think it becomes part of your identity, and it should be integrated into your business and everything that you do. And ultimately, as I think I mentioned before, is that a book makes you money not by royalties, but by creating greater awareness, and I would say better conversions for people to become clients, because it helps to accelerate the speed of trust, and it gets people from I just heard of you to now I'm your client to now you're my trusted advisor much more quickly than otherwise. And so the only reason I hedge there is the question is, okay, well, what are you currently doing in your marketing? And if the answer is nothing, then it's like, okay, well, we need to think about how we're going to intentionally do something with this book. I mean, like I literally had a call a month or two ago with someone who heard me on a podcast, reached out, and he said, okay, I wrote a book, but I haven't got any clients from it. And so I kind of, I asked him questions and said, okay, well, tell me a little bit more. And ultimately what I discovered was that, he was just starting out, and it wasn't even an area that he had proven himself, meaning that it was an idea for something that he thought would make a good business, but he hadn't yet made it a good business. And so it was just problematic because, a book in and of itself is not going to make you money. A book attached to a business that has a real business with real clients and actual activities that are involved can be extremely valuable, because it should enhance everything that you do. It should get you, if it takes 4 meetings to go from first meeting to client, it should help you go to 2 meetings, right? If you're looking to work with more affluent people, it should help you do that. If you're looking to get on podcasts, it should get you booked more easily on podcasts, create more speaking opportunities, etc. And so, I would say for 95% of the people out there, the answer is yes. But there's always that 5% where it's like, well, let's talk about it.
Yeah. And I appreciate you going through that, because as you were talking, I was putting my coach hat on, because I will get a client who will come to me and say, Rob, I'm thinking about writing a book as we're doing our annual planning. And the things that I always emphasize are, that sounds like a great idea. Yes, you should. But let's look at it in context of everything else that you're doing. Is this the right time? When you're thinking about writing your book, do you want that 6-month sabbatical or 1 year sabbatical, or probably not a year, but to take some time away to do some writing, just to put
I just imagine Stephen King out there in a mountain, snow, a pipe, a scarf.
Yeah, no, I get that, and maybe that will be my 4th book. But there are different ways to do it too, and so there's a practical, I'm using this word too much now, intentional aspect to this whole process. But I'm really glad that you came on the podcast, because you offer a terrific solution for that person who is ready to write a book, and maybe you help them determine, because if it's write it now or write it in 6 months. But it's a great solution, because you've thought this out, because you've watched how good books get put together the right way for the right reasons, and then have the effect that's really intended, for taking the time to and making the investment and putting that book together.
Yes, and part of the way that I like to frame it is that a book should help you aspirationally generate $1 million or more of revenue. And I've come up with that number because I've written multiple books, and both books that I've actually put into real play as part of my business have made me, not through royalties but through services,
Sure.
Easily $1 million a piece. But in order to do that, and so I tell advisors that that's what you should be looking to accomplish as well. But in order to make that happen, you have to have the clientele, and you have to have the existing things that you're doing. And the book makes everything that you're doing that much easier, as well as creating new opportunities that you wouldn't have done before. But if you're starting from scratch and saying, okay, I want to start a business, then, that's a little bit of a stretch. It could happen. I don't want to say it can't, but it's harder to predict that's going to happen.
Right.
For example, on the other extreme, I have a client, and he keeps growing, but I think it's about $14 billion of assets under management now. He has about 100 advisors that he works with. And so we're working with him on multiple books. And, you take just one of those books and you put it, you take the one book that he wrote as the CEO of this enterprise, and he puts it into the hands of 100 different advisors who are now using this as a tool to get more referrals and to do things of that. He has a number of CPA alliances that he works with, and now the CPAs are sending out this book to their clientele en masse. And that's where you can easily and quickly generate a lot of return on investment. But it's because he already has that leverage built in. Most people are somewhere in that middle spot, and so it's we also provide, once we help them write and publish a book, we call it book marketing coach, which then really helps to get them to think through, okay, how we're going to use this. And I'd say importantly, hold them accountable, because as we know, there's, you can have good ideas and say, oh, that sounds like a great idea. And, well, did you do it? No.
Yeah.
It was just a good idea.
There are lots of, maybe not literal, but virtual garage fulls of unsold books out there.
The good news is today, at least the way that we do it, is that Amazon's amazing, and that's where we typically will publish the books too,
Sure.
because they have print-on-demand technology. And if you use Prime, you can even send a copy of your book for $0. And so, just to paint the picture, for typically $4, you can have your books on Amazon for $4. You can it'll be printed and delivered to someone in about 2 to 4 days. And so from that aspect, it's pretty amazing. So to your point, gone are the days of having to have a garage full of books collecting dust and getting out of date.
Yeah, for sure. That's why I said there's even though it's on demand, I'm picturing that. You were talking about the marketing on the back end and how to put it to use and holding it accountable. If you create this book that you're really proud of and you don't put it into action, even if it hasn't been printed yet, there's kind of this virtual or invisible garage full of books. And you and I have been at this long enough to remember, people creating VHS business cards, and just so many other things that ended up, you had to buy 1,000 copies of them or something like that, and they just filled garages. But anyway, we need to land the plane here, Paul. Before we do, though, tell me or tell the audience what's the best way to get in touch with you and the short book formula if someone who's listening has an interest in writing a book.
Yeah, so I'll share 2 things. Number one, if you Google me, be sure you add my middle initial, which is G. So Paul G. McManus. If you don't add the middle initial, you're going to think that I'm this axe murderer out of Ireland featured on Murderpedia, which is a whole different kind of authority marketing, but I can assure you that that's not me. But if you Google Paul G. McManus, you'll see a lot of information come up. But the best place to learn more is to go to my website, which is theshortbookformula.com. There you can get a complimentary copy of my book, including an audiobook. And if it makes sense to talk, my calendar information is there as well.
Awesome. And we'll make sure that we put that information in the show notes too. So
please just add the G.
I'll add the, yes.
Otherwise, people will question what kind of guest you're bringing on your show.
In fact, when I send the note over to my producer, I'll be sure to say Paul G. McManus, so there is no confusion, so they don't
That's right.
share Paul McManus's LinkedIn profile. I don't know if
it's like a whole other level of authority marketing. I don't know if it's good or not, though.
So let's close it here. To the audience, thank you so much for listening. Of course, we'll be back next week with another great episode. But most importantly, remember, as always, we're rooting for your success. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Purpose-Focused Advisor. If you want to learn more, head over to our website, truestfancoaching.com. There you'll learn all about becoming a purpose-focused advisor. You'll also find today's show notes and links to the other gifts and resources we talked about during the episode. Again, thanks for listening, and remember, we're rooting for your success.